So the big strike that was planned for Iran called off. Some reporting that Saudi Crown Prince MBS spoke with Trump and urged him to de-escalate and refrain from launching strikes on Iran. Axios reporting that. The Saudis expressed concern and asked for clarity about the plan of action. Taking our marching orders from the Saudis, or at least requiring their clearance before we strike. Not sure about that. Marco Rubio sat down over the weekend with Laura Trump on Fox News to talk foreign policy, and had this to say about the state of play with Iran.
The Iranian regime has ever faced a president like President Trump, which is someone that actually takes action. You know, they got used to for 20 or 30 years, not just the U.S., but the broader world, allowing them to get away with things like lying, breaking deals, tricking people into agreements and so forth. In this particular case, it was pretty straightforward. Iran wants a nuclear weapon, and they were building a conventional missile shield they were going to hide behind. In essence, they wanted to be in a position a year and a half from now to be able to say, we have so many drones and so many missiles, you can't possibly defend against them. That's the place they wanted to get to. President Trump said, I'm not going to let you get to that place. And he went after, wiped out their Navy, wiped out their Air Force, wiped out their missile defenses, wiped out their launchers, wiped out their factories that make all of these things, and severely degraded their defense capabilities. Now, they still have missiles and they still have drones and they can still do damage, but they no longer have that shield, that conventional shield that they could hide behind. And that's changed the whole dynamic. It's the only reason why they are now willing, and in some cases seem eager, to do a deal on denuclearization, to do a deal on the Straits, because we're now approaching them from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness, which is what they perceived from previous administrations and, frankly, from the world writ large.
The regime change has never been the goal, though. As you say, it has been denuclearization. Can you have one without the other, though?
I think the regime has to change. You may not have a regime change, but the regime has to change. The Iranian regime traditionally has been expeditionary. In essence, their view is they don't want to just govern Iran, they want to govern the region.
Yeah, well, and so that hasn't changed, is what I'm understanding, reading between the lines in terms of your assessment. And I think that assessment is accurate, which is why the whole doing the deal thing still seems a bit disingenuous to me. By the way, I mean, just point of order, don't forget the phrase unconditional surrender was used at the outset of hostilities. So that's one way the regime can change, is just unconditionally surrender, but that's not where we're at. Rather than that, I mean, it's fine to explain where we were and how far we've come, but of course everybody wants to know where we're going and when we're getting there. And to the extent the when question is difficult to answer, that's understandable. But in terms of a public recognition that there is no real deal to be made with this regime because they are eschatological in nature. And so what's actually going to happen is, and I don't think there's really much disclosure in telegraphing this, is we'll negotiate in good faith knowing they won't. And meanwhile, they're going to bleed out under pressure from our blockade, from the financial sanctions and the throttling of their access to funds, their own funds and other funds. That's what's actually going to happen. And to the extent that they try to use their sort of capacity as pirates to strike us or our allies, then we will respond, in kind and then some, disproportionately. I don't understand why that is a difficult public position to take. It's just a matter of time, and we're going to keep the pressure on, and we are in control of this situation, despite what the D.C. press corps would have you believe. I mean, CENTCOM is doing that online, debunking the claims that are being made by the IRGC. For example, the IRGC claims free and open routes through the Strait of Hormuz are dangerous for commercial vessels. And the CENTCOM replies, the immediate dangers posed to commercial vessels and their civilian crews are the IRGC's verbal threats and attempted attacks, and so on and so forth. So, why not strip away the veneer and let's talk plainly? Because you're not telling the Iranians or the world anything that it hasn't already figured out. So why don't we just be candid about the situation? More on this and other geopolitical matters. Stephen Bucci joins us for our weekly chat. He served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official. Now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Yeah, so can we just be frank with one another, or with the global community, such as it is already?
I wish we could. I don't understand this. Now I'm getting ready to label the desire for the deal to be, somewhat irrational. We're way past that. This is one Ray Charles can see the truth, that we're not going to get a deal with these guys. I mean, they'll sit and negotiate all the way through the midterms, I'm guessing, hoping to discredit President Trump, discredit his efforts to make this look like it was a complete failure. Or what they really want is for us just to give up and let them have control of the straits. And, I hope to God we're not going to do that. As you say, I agree with Secretary Rubio that they have been degraded. They are down to a minimal capacity. But if you let the minimal capacity allow them to negotiate as if they were equals with our side, then that degradation operation we've done doesn't mean anything.
I mean, and sorry to interrupt, but I mean, the whole thing, too, with placating our Gulf state allies of convenience, or I would call them of convenience, most of them. Why can't you say to MBS, look, okay, so, all right, so I'll defer this strike for now, but let me tell you something. We're going to lay it straight. We're going to tell the world what time it is, that we are in control. What I'm doing is saving lives both in and around Tehran, as well as American soldiers' lives, by slow walking this, by playing the long game, because we're in a position where we can play the long game and they can't. And the combination of epic fury and financial fury, whatever it was called, with Scott Bessent, we are going to squeeze them into that unconditional surrender I talked about at the outset of this campaign. And it's going to take longer than we anticipated, perhaps. It's hard to predict these things. But make no mistake about who is driving the train here. Why is that such a difficult message to send to the Western world?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm with you. I would say it straight out at this point. I would have said, hey, you notice that the Iranians are targeting and talking about targeting energy infrastructure in the countries around it. That's because they are trying to tell us, please do not hit our energy infrastructure. They are worried about that. They know when we start doing that, the final degree of turning them into toast will be done. I would say that the MBL, yeah, I'm sorry. I understand your concern. We'll do our best to try and protect you, but we're taking out their energy infrastructure. Make sure your defenses are centered around yours. And if you want to start shooting at their energy infrastructure, go for it. Rather than back off at this point, I don't see any benefit to be accrued there. I don't think Saudi Arabia is telling us what to do or driving our
no.
They came to us hat in hand, said, hey, please don't do this because it's going to cost us some money. But I think the president should have said, look, I get it. We'll try our best to protect you, but we got to go forward with this. Otherwise, we've wasted all this time and effort.
Yeah, and you should say to MBS, look, I mean, you decided to waste so much money on the Live Tour. If you didn't waste money on the Live Tour, then you would have had more money to, deal with the Iranians. So just in terms of somebody sort of adopting the posture of Lindsey Graham, Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, on the reports out that Iran was targeting our infrastructure, Iran had plans to target our infrastructure in addition to, targeting actual senior members of the administration. This was John Kennedy on Meet the Press this weekend.
That Iran might be behind all of this. What should the U.S. response be if Iran is in fact attacking America's drinking water supply?
Well, we've got cyber experts. Hit them back. Iran's done this before. I'm not saying it's not Iran, but it could be North Korea. We do it to each other all the time, and I'm sorry it happened. I'm glad we caught it. But if Iran's going to start this foolishness, I would hit them back. Just like we've done with the military strikes, I'd eat them up and spit the bones on the floor.
All right, let me ask you about what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Disproportional responses to whatever Iran can muster militarily is the point.
Yeah, 100%. And cyber-wise, look, the Iranians have some cyber capability. They're not giants in the world of cyber attacks or anything else. By the way, the attacks are way easier to do than the defenses. But we could literally, as the senator so eloquently put, chew them up and spit out the bones in a heartbeat in a head-to-head cyber confrontation. We could shut them off 100%. Now, would that be some hardship to the Iranian people who are not part of the government? Yeah, it would be. But you know what? If we start a cyber attack against them and then start a public affairs assault against them, letting the Iranian people know, hey, look, we're doing this, but we got to do it to stop the tyrants that are above you. We'll help you when this is all done. Give us some flexibility. You know what? The Iranian people would be in the streets waving American flags again. They get it. We don't seem to get it.
Rubio also, in that sit-down with Lara Trump, talked a little bit about Cuba, and I thought he gave an interesting perspective on Cuba. It's this small island 90 miles south of Miami, but in terms of its role as a purveyor and producer of espionage on behalf of America's enemies, it's a superpower. Take a listen.
Interest. How did we get to a place where Cuba has become so much of a threat, it feels like, again, to the United States?
I think for those who have followed the issue of Cuba, or this is not unfamiliar to us, but to the average American, you see Cuba, small country, 90 miles off our shores, 9.5 million people population. What people forget that when it comes to things like espionage and influence operations, they actually are an influence and espionage superpower. If you look at the history of espionage in the United States, Cuba is the only country that consistently has implanted and embedded spies in our system without even paying them. We had an ambassador, a U.S. ambassador, who ended up being a Cuban spy and was recently convicted. We've had them penetrate the highest levels of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Ana Belén Montes was one of the single biggest intelligence failures on the part of the United States and one of the biggest penetrations we've ever had in our system. And then on the influence front, if you look all throughout Latin America, every communist left-wing insurgency that's destabilized governments across the region, every single one of them over the last 40, 50 years has found its support, its help, in many cases its birth, from a Cuban influence operation. So it was an important report just to highlight the role they play in our country, a very negative role.
The report also links Cuban influence to the rise of Antifa, the riots that we saw in 2020, as well as the surge of radical activism.
So, per the 90-page report on Cuba that they were both referencing, and Rubio providing more color on that, what should be done, and can it be done concurrent with the ongoing issues in the Middle East?
Yeah, it can be done. I don't think we need to attack Cuba kinetically, but we need to shut Cuba down more so than we have already. Obviously, the blockades and the sanctions we've had on them for a long time are not enough because they're not stopping their nefarious activities. But we need to be straightforward about it and open so that it affects the Cuban people as well. Let them know you are suffering not because the gringos are so mean to you. It's because your government keeps attacking America. that's why we're doing it.
Well,
Now,
I mean,
will that convince everybody? No, but it'll resonate with a lot of the people that are already, at least nascent dissidents within the Cuban system.
but I mean, where is that at? I mean, the lights have been turned off in Cuba intermittently for extended periods of time over the last several weeks. I mean, the situation seems fairly dire, and there were some suggestions that Diaz-Canel might not be long for this world, again, intermittently over the last several weeks. And yet it just sort of, the regime just sort of limps on. So, do we just, again, take a patient posture and stay the course and hope the regime collapses in on itself like we could possibly do in Iran, or do something more aggressive than that, short of kinetic action, as you said?
I'm not sure doing anything more aggressive, trending towards the kinetic is necessary. I think we can up the pressure on them and be a little patient, but we need to do a better job at calling them out. We still have leftists all over this country who applaud the Cubans as a success story, and that everything would be fine there if we would just leave them alone. But they're starving now because Russia can't afford to support them anymore. We can sell anything in the world to anybody when they totally don't need it, but somehow our government can't use those same skills to influence people around the world by telling them the truth. I don't get that. Maybe because advertising is not about the truth; it's about lying. But I think if we went with the truth, we could get some stuff done here.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official, now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thank you as always.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. We'll talk to you next wealth.
And Stephen joined us in the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Some places just become part of the community.